Stop scrolling for just a moment, because what you are about to hear looks on the surface like another routine royal commentary cycle. A photograph of a young princess, a sad birthday, a wistful father in California. But underneath it, there is something far more revealing happening this week. A pattern of small, almost invisible signals coming from inside Buckingham Palace, from inside Highgrove, and from inside the very newspapers that have spent years protecting Prince Harry. By the end of the next several minutes, you will understand exactly why the past 48 hours have produced more genuinely consequential royal moments than the previous 2 months combined, and why, taken together, they form a picture of the Sussex situation that even the most loyal supporters can no longer easily ignore. Welcome to Royal Report Daily, your most trusted source for breaking royal news and exclusive investigations. Tonight we are moving through 3 distinct chapters. The Charlotte birthday photograph and what it triggered in Montecito. The quiet, almost ceremonial removal of a wedding photograph from the most personal corner of King Charles's private home. And the surreal, perhaps even slightly desperate magazine tribute that Prince Harry has just published for one of the most beloved figures in British public life. 3 small moments, 3 different rooms, 1 unmistakable conclusion. The official Sussex narrative is unraveling in real time, and the cracks are now visible from every angle. Don't forget to subscribe to Royal Report Daily and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single update. Picture the first scene. London, late spring 2026. Catherine, Princess of Wales, releases an official photograph of her daughter, Princess Charlotte, on her 11th birthday. The image is by every account lovely. A young royal smiling, surrounded by the gentle confidence of a childhood that is genuinely loved, genuinely protected, genuinely full of family. It is the kind of picture that British and Commonwealth audiences have come to expect from the Wales household. Quiet, dignified, warm, untouched by any of the manufactured drama that defines too much of contemporary celebrity culture. And according to reporting from the Daily Mail's Richard Eden, citing friends close to Prince Harry, that single image landed in California with the force of a small earthquake. A friend of the Duke of Sussex told Eden that Harry desperately wishes his own children, Prince Archie, who turned 7 this week, and Princess Lilibet, who is 4, enjoyed the same sort of childhood as their cousin Charlotte. Prince George and Prince Louis. Read that quote carefully. Sit with it. Because it is the closest thing we have ever seen to a public admission from Harry's own circle that the choice he made in 2020 has cost his children something profound, something he can no longer pretend has been replaced by anything equivalent in California. Archie and Lilibet are having a lovely time, the friend continued, but Harry is very sad that they are missing out on life with the rest of their family. During his return visit to Britain last September, Harry told them that he and Meghan plan to educate their children in this country, meaning the United Kingdom. Harry feels his children are missing out on the extensive family network that their cousins are enjoying, all of whom currently attend the same private school, the same family of cousins, the same shared rhythm of an English childhood that Harry himself once enjoyed. Pause on the structural significance of that briefing, because what you are looking at is not a casual remark. It is a calculated leak. The Sussex public relations machine in Montecito has decided quite deliberately to put this thought into circulation. Why? Because Harry needs the public to know that he at least still wants to come home. He still wants the children to experience an English education. He still wants to maintain the option of a future on this side of the Atlantic. Stay tuned to Royal Report Daily. We bring you the stories that matter. But here is the problem. The same friend in the same briefing was forced to concede the actual heart of the matter. Harry, the friend admitted, may have a challenge selling his plan to Meghan. The Duchess is said to consider sending children to boarding school. Barbaric. Read that word again. Barbaric. The most loaded, most aggressive single word a parent could possibly use to describe an educational tradition in which her own husband and centuries of his ancestors were raised. Now consider what that single word actually means in the context of a royal briefing dropped to the Daily Mail. It is quite clearly a preemptive shot fired across the bows of the Wales household. Because Prince George Catherine and William's eldest, is widely expected to begin his own boarding school education in September. The Sussex publicity team chose in a single carefully phrased sentence to characterize that decision before it has even been formally announced as barbaric, to suggest that the future king of the United Kingdom and his wife are, by sending their son to a traditional English boarding school, doing something cruel. That is not a private opinion. That is not a respectful disagreement between sisters-in-law. That is a calculated, weaponized public attack on the parenting choices of the future king, released through anonymous friends, filtered through a sympathetic columnist, dressed up in the soft language of personal preference, but landing with absolute clarity as a deliberate insult. And there is something else worth pausing on here, something that goes deeper than a single word in a single newspaper article. The British public has over many years watched the Wales household navigate parenting under conditions of extraordinary public scrutiny, with quiet, almost monastic discipline. Catherine and William have not lectured the country about modern parenting. They have not staged elaborate magazine spreads about their personal philosophies of childhood. They have not given moralizing interviews about the right way to raise the next generation. They have instead simply got on with it. They have raised 3 children whose public appearances suggest happy, secure, well-loved young people, fully embedded in a wider British family network of cousins, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. That is parenting by demonstration, not by sermon. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to Royal Report Daily for more exclusive investigations. The Sussex briefing strategy, by contrast, depends entirely on telling the world how it should feel, and then attacking anyone who feels differently. The problem with that strategy is that the British public, with its long memory and its instinctive suspicion of self-appointed moral instructors, has simply stopped listening. They have, with patient civic intelligence, watched the Sussex sermons, observed the Sussex behavior underlying them, and quietly drawn their own conclusions. The briefing itself contains a contradiction so obvious it should embarrass the Sussex public relations team. Within the same article, Harry is portrayed as desperately wishing his children could enjoy the kind of British family life their cousins do, while his wife is portrayed as being so philosophically opposed to that very tradition that she calls it barbaric. Those are not two compatible positions. Those are not two parents working through a difference. Those are two fundamentally incompatible visions of childhood dropped into a single newspaper article with the public left to draw the obvious conclusion. They are not on the same page. They are not even reading the same book. There is something even more significant beneath the surface of this story, because the Daily Mail framing then suggests that Harry mentioned his plans to educate the children in Britain to his own father, the king, when they met for tea at Clarence House last September. The implication, quietly but unmistakably, is that the king is somehow delighted by the prospect. That this is a story of warming family relations and a monarchy gently opening the door to the prodigal son's return. That implication does not survive a moment of genuine scrutiny, because the king has not by any credible account been delighted by anything coming out of Montecito for some time. And that leads us directly to the second chapter of tonight's story, the most quietly devastating moment of the week. Don't miss a single update. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. Highgrove, the king's private retreat in Gloucestershire, the home he loves more than almost any other property in his estate. A place defined by gardens, by personal touches, by the careful arrangement of family photographs that, for any private person, mark the most intimate corners of a home. Lydia Millen, the lifestyle influencer, photographed a small wooden table in one of those rooms several years ago. On that table, prominently displayed, was a wedding photograph from May of 2018. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle smiling on their wedding day, occupying a place of honor in the king's most personal space. That photograph is gone. Royal photographer Chris Jackson, who was at Highgrove this week to host an event, posted images of the same room on his Instagram. The wooden table is still there. The arrangement of frames is still there. But the wedding photograph has been quietly, carefully, deliberately removed. In its place, 2 images. One showing King Charles shoulder to shoulder with both of his sons, William and Harry, from earlier and simpler years. And another showing King Charles holding his grandson, Prince Louis, the youngest of the Wales children, the grandson he sees regularly, the grandson who is part of his life. Hello Magazine, ever the soft hand on royal coverage, gently suggested that Charles's team may have simply chosen to display the wedding image elsewhere. This is not a coincidence. This is not a casual rearrangement. This is symbolism in its purest, most calculated, most deeply considered form. Because the late Queen understood symbolism, Charles understands it too. Every photograph in a royal home is a deliberate statement about who is family, who is welcome, and who is no longer present in the daily emotional life of the monarch. When the late Queen delivered her Christmas message in 2019 and the Sussexes noticed that a particular family photograph had not been placed on her table, that single quiet decision became, by their own accounts, one of the final triggers for their departure from the institution. They understood. They knew exactly what it meant. So they cannot now in 2026 pretend that the disappearance of their wedding photograph from the king's private retreat is anything other than what it is. A clear, deliberate, almost ceremonial gesture of distance. A father quietly, sorrowfully removing the image of a wedding day that in retrospect did not produce the family outcome anyone had hoped for. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily and stay ahead of every royal development. The king is not delighted by Harry's vague conversations about returning the children to British education. The king is grieving. The king is reconfiguring his daily emotional life to accommodate the reality that his younger son is for the foreseeable future not a part of it. That is what the missing photograph means. And the Sussex briefing strategy, the carefully placed Daily Mail article, the suggestion that the king is delighted by talk of British schooling, cannot survive contact with this single piece of physical evidence. The wedding photograph is gone. The king has spoken. He has spoken without saying a single word. And every royal commentator who has been paying attention this week has heard him perfectly. Pause for a moment on the deeper meaning of that photograph removal. Because what makes it so devastating is not the simple fact of a frame moved from a table. It is the choice of what replaced it. King Charles did not leave the table empty. He did not simply create a gap. He carefully and deliberately replaced the wedding image with two specific photographs that send their own message. The first, an older photograph showing Charles with both of his sons, William and Harry, shoulder to shoulder from a time before the rupture. That image is in many ways an act of paternal grief. A father who still loves his son. A father who still mourns the family that once was. A father willing to keep an older, simpler photograph of all of them together even now. That is a heartbreaking gesture. It should be read with the tenderness it deserves. The second image, however, is the operational one. King Charles holding Prince Louis, the youngest of the Wales children, the grandson he sees regularly, the grandson who is part of his daily emotional life. By placing that photograph in the prime spot once occupied by the Sussex wedding day, the king is not simply making a statement about who is no longer present. He is making a statement about who is filling that space instead. Louis has stepped into the place that was once occupied in the king's most personal home by the Sussex wedding photograph. That is not subtle. That is not ambiguous. That is the King of the United Kingdom quietly, gently, almost mournfully reordering his own emotional household to reflect the new shape of his family. Hit that like button and subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. Now, the third chapter of tonight's story. And in some ways, the most quietly poignant of all. This week, the great British naturalist Sir David Attenborough turned 100 years old, a genuine national treasure. A man who has narrated the natural world to multiple generations of British and global audiences. The most universally respected broadcasting figure in modern British public life. By every account, his preference for this milestone was a relatively low-key family celebration. The kind of dignified, modest moment that has defined his entire public life. But here is what arrived from Montecito. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, has published in Time magazine a tribute to Sir David Attenborough, the Duke of Sussex, a man whose own approval rating sits at 30% in the United Kingdom, a man who has spent the past several years in a series of increasingly bitter public conflicts with his family, has decided, completely without prompting, completely without any obvious connection to Sir David's actual relationship with the British royal family, to publish a glossy, carefully composed magazine tribute. Why? Why this tribute? Why this magazine? Why this moment? The answer, when you look at it honestly, is uncomfortable. Because the tribute beautifully written though it appears, does not actually sound like Harry. Read the opening framing. It references Sir David as a secular saint, an institutional pillar as essential to the national fabric as a cup of tea, whose whispers have been the soft soundtrack of the home. That is lovely prose, genuinely lovely. But ask yourself honestly, does that prose sound like the man who recorded the audio version of Spare? Does that tone match the voice we have heard in every interview, every documentary, every commercial appearance Harry has made for the past decade? Or does it sound like something written by a professional ghostwriter? The biggest compliment any reader can give a piece of writing is, "Oh, it sounded just like you. I could hear your voice in the page." The Time magazine tribute fails that single most important test of authentic prose. It does not sound like the man who supposedly wrote it. And in a media environment where authenticity has become the single most valuable currency a public figure can possess, that failure is genuinely revealing. Royal Report Daily, bringing you the truth behind every royal headline. The truly sad part is that Harry could have, with the smallest amount of personal effort, written something genuine. A short, heartfelt note in his own voice about his own memories of watching Sir David's documentaries with his late mother. A real story about how that voice shaped his own childhood understanding of the natural world. Anything that sounded like a human being instead of a press release. Sir David Attenborough did not need a glossy magazine spread from a Sussex public relations operation. The tribute in the end was not for him. The tribute was for Harry. And there is something worth noting about the timing. King Charles has a genuinely substantive friendship with Sir David that extends across professional and personal dimensions. Prince William, who founded the Earthshot Prize specifically to celebrate the kind of environmental innovation Sir David has spent his career documenting, has a working professional relationship with him built on years of shared cause. These are real earned, demonstrated relationships. They were not constructed in a public relations office last week to coincide with a glossy magazine deadline. Harry's relationship with Sir David is by every available account considerably less developed. The tribute reads, in its insistence on the deepest possible connection to Sir David, almost like a man auditioning for a relationship he does not actually have. The late Queen, who would have sent Sir David his 100th birthday letter had she lived, would not have needed a glossy magazine column to demonstrate the depth of her regard. She would have done what she did so brilliantly throughout her reign, made a small, quiet, dignified gesture that said everything without saying anything at all. The contrast with Harry's magazine-driven approach could not be sharper. Don't miss a single update. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. There is one more dimension to this week worth examining, and it brings us back to the contrast that runs underneath every single moment of this story. Prince William this week was photographed at a football match, cheering, reacting, visibly, openly, completely caught up in the emotion of watching his beloved Aston Villa play. There was predictably some commentary suggesting this was somehow undignified for a future king. This commentary is wildly out of step with what the British public actually wants from its monarchy in the 21st century. Remember the late Queen Elizabeth watching her horses race at Ascot. The unmistakable joy on her face, the binoculars raised, the genuine human emotion of a woman who loved what she was watching. Nobody suggested the Queen's joy at a horse race undermined the dignity of the crown. On the contrary, it was one of the moments that made her most beloved. It humanized her. William, cheering for Aston Villa, is doing exactly the same thing his grandmother did. He is showing the British public that the future king is a man with real feelings about real things that real people care about. That is not a failure of dignity. That is the entire essence of why a modern monarchy survives. And here is the contrast that really matters. William cheers at a football match and reaches the British public on the level they want to be reached on. Harry publishes a tribute that sounds like it was written by an algorithm in a magazine he has no obvious relationship with, about a man whose deepest royal connections lie elsewhere. One of these is a future king connecting with his country. The other is a former working royal trying with increasingly visible desperation to find an angle that might generate a positive headline cycle in an international media landscape that has largely moved on. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily and stay connected. The numbers themselves tell the entire story. Recent YouGov polling on royal popularity is genuinely staggering. The late Queen sits at 81% positive. Princess Diana at 77. Prince William at 76. Catherine at 75. Princess Anne at 70. King Charles at 60%, despite navigating enormous personal and institutional challenges. Prince Edward at 53. And then the gap. Harry at 30%. Meghan at 20%. Prince Andrew in his own category of catastrophic public unpopularity at 3%. These are not subtle differences. These are not statistical wobbles. These are generational, structural, almost civilizational gaps in public regard. 8 out of 10 British people view Meghan negatively. 7 out of 10 view Harry negatively. That is the cold, immovable fact sitting underneath every glossy magazine tribute, every leaked Daily Mail briefing, every careful piece of public relations strategy emerging from Montecito. The country has made up its mind. So where does that leave us tonight? It leaves us with 3 small, seemingly unconnected moments that taken together paint a complete picture of the Sussex situation in the spring of 2026. A Daily Mail briefing that exposes a profound fault line between Harry and Meghan over their children's future. A missing wedding photograph at Highgrove that speaks louder than any palace press release. And a Time magazine tribute that fails the simplest test of authentic personal voice. These are not isolated stories. They are the same story told from 3 different angles. And the story they tell is this. The Sussex public project has reached its natural exhaustion point. The carefully constructed mythology of the post-royal life is no longer producing the cultural traction it once produced. The institution that Harry walked away from is slowly and unmistakably withdrawing from him in return. And the audience he left it for has by every available measure lost interest. Hit that like button and subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. The institution always wins. The institution always endures. The institution always finds a way to gently let go of the people who tried to rewrite its story, while quietly preserving the story itself for the next generation. Catherine and William, the future of the crown. Charlotte, George, and Louis, the children who will carry it forward. Princess Anne, the steady moral conscience of the senior generation. King Charles, the dignified, increasingly grandfatherly figure presiding over a family that, despite every public turbulence, is somehow knitting itself back together with the absent threads removed. That is the picture emerging from the spring of 2026, and every small signal this week confirms it. The wedding photograph is gone from the table at Highgrove. The Daily Mail briefing has revealed the deep fracture inside the Montecito household. The Time magazine tribute has shown how deeply the Sussex public relations operation now depends on prose that does not even sound like its own subject. These are not victories for the British monarchy. They are instead the quiet, mournful, almost tender confirmation of a chapter slowly closing. A chapter that began with a fairy tale wedding in St. George's Chapel in May of 2018. And that has, 8 years later, ended with a missing photograph, a leaked briefing, and a tribute written perhaps by someone other than the man whose name appears at the top of the page. The tradition of the British monarchy has always rested on a single, almost invisible foundation. The patient, daily, unglamorous performance of duty by people who could, if they chose, have lived very different lives. Catherine did not have to marry into this. She chose to. Princess Anne did not have to spend 6 decades doing more public engagements than almost any other royal in modern history. She chose to. King Charles did not have to spend 70 years preparing for a role he only recently stepped into. He chose to. The Sussex story in its current trajectory is the inverse of that principle. It is the story of 2 people who accepted the role and then walked away from the duty while attempting to retain the perks. That asymmetry between privilege accepted and obligations rejected is what the British public can no longer extend goodwill toward. The wedding photograph at Highgrove was not removed in anger. It was removed in sorrow. The Daily Mail briefing was not leaked in malice. It was leaked in confused longing. The Time magazine tribute was not published in cynicism. It was published in the desperation of a man who needs the world to keep noticing him. None of these are the actions of a confident, settled, happy household. They are the actions of a household in slow, dignified crisis. And the British public watching from across an ocean has seen enough to draw the obvious conclusion. The fairy tale is over. The institution endures. And the slow, careful, almost ceremonial closing of that chapter is now visible in every photograph that has been moved, every briefing that has been leaked, and every tribute that has been written by someone other than the man whose name appears at the top of the page. The wedding photograph has left the room. The room itself remains. And the story of the British monarchy, as ever, continues without a stumble into the next chapter, the next generation, the next quiet act of the longest constitutional drama in the modern world. This has been Royal Report Daily and bringing you the complete truth behind the most important royal stories of 2026. If this investigation gave you new perspective on the Sussex situation and what is really happening behind the palace walls, please hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Share this video with everyone following this extraordinary royal story. Turn on your notifications so you are always the first to know when we publish our next exclusive report. Because the story of the British monarchy in 2026 is told not in dramatic announcements, but in small, deliberate, painfully eloquent gestures. And Royal Report Daily will be right here, reading every single one of them, for you. Stay informed, stay connected, and we will see you in our next report.